Welcome everyone to the second session in this group. Today we're going to be having Kurt Baumgartner come and speak to us about on the StrongPity watering hole attacks. Everyone please join me in welcoming Kurt.
All right, good morning everyone. Thanks for attending my talk. I'm Kurt Baumgartner. I'm a principal security researcher with Kaspersky Lab's Global Research Analysis team. I've been with the company about 6 years, most of it looking at targeted attacks and quite a bit of other work regarding exploit kits and Java exploitation and other things. But today I want to talk with you about a watering hole tactic, or an APT tactic. And in particular, this one was carried out fairly recently over the summer by a publicly undisclosed APT. The watering hole attack themselves and watering hole as a tactic is not altogether new, is not altogether fresh. But what's interesting about this set of attacks in particular is that they were very focused on users of encryption technologies. In particular, Italian and Belgian users were hit the most, but Turkish and throughout the Middle East and some in North Africa were hit as well. And so I will talk to you about both the group and the tactics and sort of what the problem here is, why bother talking about this in the first place. So all in all, I'll be starting off with talking about the relevant encryption tools they were interested in, both to enable their attacks on these users and sort of the secondary tools that they were after once they were on the systems, what they could do with those technologies and why they were vulnerable. We'll look at previous watering holes to compare against. Probably the most relevant to compare what StrongPity is doing now is what Crouching Yeti or Energetic Bear did in 2014. Their focus in particular was on ICS organizations or critical infrastructure. They used Trojanized installers and replaced them on various sites. We'll look into those and make that comparison. And then I'll look at the specifics of the StrongPity attacks that lasted. 2 of the sites were up for about, or compromised, or at least redirecting users to poisoned installers for around a week to 2 weeks. And then there's a third site that is much more recent, and over the weekend it was up and serving malware, so please don't visit the site. But that in particular is TrueCrypt. They're going after users of full disk encryption, an older tool for it. We'll look at the geo-targeting, what ends up happening with these sort of reckless watering hole attacks, and then we can talk a little bit about what they're doing once they get on systems. So the encryption technology, you can really categorize into 2 things that StrongPity is interested in. One set of tools falls under really data at rest. So Winrar and TrueCrypt work on data at rest. So Winrar, you pack an archive, but then you can follow it up with a password of virtually unlimited length. And the package can be packed, or is encrypted, I should say, with AES 256. So effectively, you can have an unbreakable archive for all practical purposes using Winrar as it's available now. TrueCrypt is a little different. It's interesting because it's a killed project. It's available on SourceForge. The developers tell you not to use it. There was a lot of drama around auditing the package and whether or not people should be using TrueCrypt. And essentially, they offer it now to migrate data away from TrueCrypt and onto, say, a hardware encryption drive, or a hardware encrypted drive, which is interesting. Either the defenders are still using an outdated tool, which is quite possible. People are still running WinXP and critical infrastructure. But more likely than not, they're looking at older data that they want to move into a new environment. So that's interesting too. And then the second type of tools, or the second set of tools, has to do with data in motion, encrypting data in motion. So whether IM clients like Skype or Jabber are being used, SSH clients, I believe everybody here knows about Secure Shell and what a great tool it is. And then finally, moving data and moving communications with FileZilla, secure Windows copy client, and then RDP clients as well. The problem with people depending on tools like this isn't necessarily the strength of the encryption, but may have more to do with how they're being distributed. This continues to be a real problem, and this is what StrongPity is taking advantage of. So TrueCrypt itself may be distributed through SourceForge and several mirrors, but there's no way to really verify that a TrueCrypt site and sort of the state of the project may be deployed somewhere else or distributed from another site properly. There are PGP keys, there are all sorts of MD5, but a lot of people just are not as technical as they should be, perhaps. The ease of use, the ability to identify whether or not a hash or signature is valid. Some people just are not doing that very well. There are also resellers and distributors of Winrar, for example. So what may look like a localized version of Winrar may really be a poisoned installer. And it's just very hard to see and to understand where it should be coming from and how it should be properly distributed. We do have appropriate places like, the the Apple Store, the Microsoft Store, Microsoft Update. They're using SSL. They're using keys to verify the packages. Chrome Update verifies software coming across the wire. But in a lot of cases for open source encryption packages and WinRAR and other packages, it's just not easy. It's just not sort of hassle-free to identify you're getting a valid encryption technology deployed or distributed to your system. So with Crouching Yeti, again, that's the most relevant watering hole technique when you're comparing different actors. They poisoned installers, so installers of all sorts, whether it was VPN clients that are mainly used in critical infrastructure, sort of industrial strength digital camera driver installers. So Energetic Bear would compromise a website or an FTP site, pull down the installer for the drivers or the software that they're interested in, poison it with a backdoor, and then put it back on the site for industrial IT environments or industrial environment IT staff to download and install within their organization. So that was very effective in 2014. And again, StrongPity is doing something very similar this summer. So what are we really seeing? Well, in one case, it seems that StrongPity couldn't fully compromise the distributor site. They were able to get a link on the site. You see here a button. There's a blue button that recommends, oh, this is the version you really want to install. It's either x64, x32, or one of several languages. In the background, really what they were doing is they had set up a site called RARLab. And when you look at RARLab, the legitimate site, and RARLab, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. And especially with just a simple redirect from a button, that's going to download to your system something that looks very much like an appropriate installer. But instead, what they had on this RARLab site was a set of installers that were poisoned and would drop their backdoors and their spyware to an individual's systems. And again, this is very difficult for most end users to identify and verify that this version of WinRAR is the one that they're after. If you go to the winrar.be site now, you'll see a nice little section here that gives you keys. And it tells you, or hashes, I should say, SHA-256, that tell you what the package you're downloading should match up with or should be fingerprinted with. The problem with that is if the site was compromised, they could very easily replace the key as well. So there isn't sort of a two-factor verification of this software package for users of encryption. We saw something very similar. The attackers had compromised Winrar.it. This is a localized distributor of Winrar. And over HTTPS, people would end up downloading from the server itself these poison packages. And they were localized. They were also delivered appropriately. So there were x64 versions and x32 versions being delivered to the end user system appropriately. Since then, these guys have cleaned up the site, and StrongPity is not being delivered. But again, when you look at the site and download this stuff, it's very difficult to verify for sort of a typical end user to verify whether or not the encryption technology they're downloading is the appropriate one. At the same time, these guys were interested in TrueCrypt. Now, the interesting thing about putting WinRAR and TrueCrypt together is that if you're encrypting with WinRAR and you're encrypting with TrueCrypt, and you're using, say, a file sharing site, you can have a virtual end-to-end encrypted, fully encrypted solution. On the right here, or on your left, there you can see TrueCrypt.sourceforge.net. This is the legitimate source of the TrueCrypt package at this point. And this is true-crypt.com is what StrongPity set up. And again, please don't visit that site. What you'd have to do is there's a very long list of instructions and warnings about not using the package. And then at the very bottom, there's a link to a StrongPity malware package that does install TrueCrypt, the software package, and then alongside you get a little treat, and you get the backdoor dropper, and it can install keyloggers and some other spyware along with it. But again, this is very difficult for sort of the average user who's interested in privacy and securing their data to really differentiate between the two. So really, what did StrongPity hit over the summer? Well, over here, you can see from the Belgian site, the redirects to ralrob.com hit mostly all Belgian users. In this case, they hit almost 100 users that we have visibility into. So that means to me that we're seeing the tip of the iceberg, and this is clearly more than just 100 users that are getting hit. Also interesting is that Northern African visitors were getting hit with the same malware along with Dutch and so on. On the winrar.it site, mostly all Italian users, which tells me this watering hole was a very sloppy attack. And from there, you'll also see Belgian and Algerian users were getting hit as well. And then finally, with the TrueCrypt site, you see almost all of the users getting hit are localized. The attacks really are in Turkey. The method they were using to push users to the true-crypt.com site was to place links and place redirects on two other sites within Turkey itself. So software aggregation sites that are a collection of freeware and shareware and other things. They basically replaced links on that site and redirected people to their TrueCrypt.com site. So again, a very sloppy method of targeting a select set of individuals you're after. And all in all, this group, they've deployed zero-day in the past, so they're technically very capable. They've effectively spearphished entire organizations and groups. And so they can be very precise with what they do, But apparently that wasn't working, so they shifted their tactics to a very sloppy method, which is this water holing. So once they're on a system, some of the additional components, StrongPity components that they download to a system, are interested in these other encryption tools. So it's not just Winrar and TrueCrypt. They're interested in SH clients that are secure shell clients that specifically run on Windows systems. They know exactly what they're after here. They're dealing with IM clients that maintain strong encryption. So they download keyloggers and multiple components specifically crafted to steal contacts and communications from these as well. So the focus specifically is on the fact that these widely available, easy to install encryption technologies are being used by their targets, and they can't, clearly they can't access the data once it's encrypted with these solutions. So I don't know if you'd call this a side channel attack or simply system compromise, but the unusual and the sort of extraordinary focus of these guys is clearly on users of encryption technologies. All right, and with that, I'd just like to open up to some questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and one of our runners will bring the microphone to you. Over here.
Thanks. That last slide you showed a bunch of different tools. Can you say a little more about what it is that you observed them doing with those tools? I thought you said they were installing those tools. Are you saying they're installing compromised versions of those tools so they can?
So okay, good question. So can I clarify on really what they're using as an attack vector and what they're collecting data from? So this last slide is what they're interested in collecting data from. They weren't using these as an attack vector. So Winrar, the watering hole sites related to localization and distributor sites, those were being used as an attack vector. TrueCrypt was being used as an attack vector. I'm going to guess they're after the data being hidden by that stuff as well, but that's the attack vector. And then multiple components that were downloaded to systems later on were hard-coded and specifically looking to steal data from these sorts of tools. So clearly they're wrestling with the encryption problem. So here's my last point. So why even talk about this? Well, clearly with these tools, or with, I should say, Winrar, I should say these tools are very effective encryption technologies. If one was to access PCAPs of the data flowing across these, communications, the work is going nowhere. But what they're doing is they're going after the low-hanging fruit. And right now the low-hanging fruit is verification and true validation of installation and identity of these encryption packages. And in particular, Winrar and TrueCrypt is what they were abusing, and that sort of distribution system. Yeah.
So just to make sure I get it, so these are all interesting tools, and I can understand why the attacker would be interested in what you're doing with them. Are you saying they're installing malware that lets them observe data that's manipulated by these applications?
That's being encrypted with these.
Okay, but they're bringing malware that lets them get visibility before the encryption happens.
Yes.
That targets these. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Bueller. Well, not seeing any other questions, I guess we'll wrap up a little early. Everyone, please join me in thanking Kurt for his presentation.
Thank you.